Hey guys, tonight we drift into the sands where camels groan under burdens heavier than silk or spice, because tucked inside those swaying packs are whispers of something far stranger. Nomadic libraries that once crept across the deserts like shadows of forgotten thought. The horizon is painted in pale amber, a sun dripping low, and the caravan around you creaks forward, each wooden axle sounding like a sigh. You can almost smell the leather bindings heating under the sun, parchment sweating the way you do when someone insists on turning off the air conditioning in August. And honestly, looking at the endless dunes, you're already parched enough to envy the scrolls for having ink to drink. You sure wouldn't survive out here. Forget Wi-Fi. You'd probably complain about sand in your shoes within 5 minutes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and the local time, because I always wonder where and when you're listening. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The desert caravan pulls you along. Lanterns swing on poles, their flames trembling against twilight, and merchants mutter about profits, safe passage, and rumors of books carried in secret. You walk slower, because the sand drags your ankles like a toddler who doesn't want you to leave the playground. The camel beside you exhales a grunt that smells like hay and sour milk, which is oddly comforting. At least something here is alive besides the sand. A merchant in russet robes leans close and mutters about scrolls that vanish into tents, libraries that don't sit in marble halls but walk on 4 hooves. It sounds ridiculous, like saying your local Starbucks could pack up and follow the bus route. Yet in the shifting silk road it feels plausible. You hear the clink of bells tied to bridles, each note like a tiny punctuation mark against the silence. Traders discuss the wealth of Samarkand, the dangers of bandits, and, quietly, the idea that knowledge itself is being smuggled across dunes. One points to a saddlebag bulging oddly, not with grain but with wooden cases. You imagine inside, brittle scrolls written in a script no one here can fully read, their letters curling like sleepy snakes. Maybe they're records of astronomy. Maybe just shopping lists for goats, but either way they are guarded as if treasure. The night settles, and torches paint long fingers of gold across the sand. You catch yourself thinking this looks like a medieval road movie, but slower, dustier, and with camels as the soundtrack instead of synth music. One old man chuckles that the real riches aren't silk, not spices, but words. His breath smells faintly of onions, so you step back, but his point lingers. Out here where thirst gnaws and horizons blur, the thought that people carried libraries, actual moving, breathing libraries, feels both absurd and noble. You pass by a young boy leading a donkey, the creature's basket swaying. A corner of parchment peeks out, edges ragged, letters smeared by sweat and dust. The boy notices your gaze and shrugs as if to say, "This is nothing special," but you know it is. Who carries Plato or Persian poetry like spare sandals? You do tonight in your imagination. Wind rattles through dunes, hissing like paper, shuffled by invisible hands. The caravan halts and fires spark. Smoke curls upward, scented with lamb fat and resin, mixing with the musky breath of beasts. Around you, voices rise, not loud but steady. They speak of trade, of roads, but also of hidden texts. Stories slip into the conversation the way a spice blends into stew, barely noticed until it lingers on your tongue. The stars above appear cruelly bright, each one like a lamp turned on at the worst possible time, right when you wanted darkness. You stretch your shoulders, hearing your own bones complain, and realize this is what sleep felt like for travelers centuries ago. Uneasy, under watch, haunted by both dreams and the need to guard what they carried. Except you, lucky you, can just pull a blanket up and complain about the thermostat. Someone laughs, a sharp, sudden crack in the desert silence. You glance over, and a trader is telling a joke about scrolls too heavy to carry, so they use them as tent poles. The others groan but chuckle anyway, proving that even in ancient caravans, bad puns survived the journey. And you smile because you know deep down, history is never as solemn as textbooks pretend. It's messy, funny, and sometimes just as sleepy as you are now. So you settle into the rhythm of steps and sighs, caravans shifting like a slow beast across sand. And as the fire crackles low, you feel the first spark of tonight's strange story, that somewhere in these swaying tents and dusty saddlebags, entire worlds of knowledge are moving quietly, stubbornly refusing to be forgotten. even as the desert tries its best to swallow everything. The caravan has become your lullaby, the crunch of hooves against sand mixing with the creak of leather straps, and the whispers of merchants slipping into the background like half-remembered dreams. By now you're no longer surprised to see a crate slide open and reveal not spices, not coins, but scrolls stacked in bundles like dry breadsticks, fragile yet essential. The man guarding them strokes the parchment edge with the same reverence you've seen people reserve for newborn babies or brand new iPhones, except these scrolls won't let you download games or send memes. Unless you count a doodle of a camel in the margin as medieval comedy. You sit near one of the fires, its glow painting shadows across faces weathered by years of trade. Someone mutters about how knowledge itself is contraband in these lands, carried with the same care as gold dust. And you realize that these nomadic libraries were never housed in marble halls with vaulted ceilings. They were stuffed into saddlebags, tucked into hidden compartments, and sometimes just wrapped in cloth like leftover sandwiches. The desert wind rattles the canvas overhead, and you think of how fragile history really is. Fluttering like a tent flap, one man in a teal robe offers you a sip from his clay mug, the liquid sour, sharp, but strangely refreshing. He tells you stories of a caravan lost years ago, 100 camels swallowed by a sandstorm, their cargo nothing less than manuscripts. Somewhere under the dunes, he says, lies a buried library, scrolls preserved in sand coffins unread for centuries. You imagine archaeologists digging one day, brushing sand from pages, squinting at ink faded like old tattoos. Historians still argue whether such tales are real or just fireside exaggerations, but you admit, half asleep as you are, that it feels true enough to dream about. The fire pops, a log collapsing inward like a sigh. Sparks climb the air and vanish into the black sky, like tiny prayers for safe passage. Around you, merchants keep talking. One boasts of a scroll filled with Chinese medical recipes, wrapped carefully against moisture. Another claims to carry Persian poetry, verses that flutter like birds if you read them aloud. You don't know who to believe, but then again, this is history. It's less about certainty and more about the delicious confusion left behind. Your head tilts back, the stars above glaring down like nosy neighbors who refuse to close their curtains. The Milky Way spills across the sky, looking suspiciously like flour dust on a baker's counter. Someone near you jokes that if you could read the heavens properly, you'd never get lost. Another replies, "Yes, but the heavens don't tell you when the camels need water." Laughter ripples, thin but real, and you realize that even in the midst of safeguarding fragile knowledge, humor kept people sane. You pull your cloak tighter as the night cools. The desert never does temperature in moderation. It's either frying pan or ice bath, nothing in between. Your fingers ache slightly as you imagine scribes hunched in tents, copying text by lamplight, with hands stiffer than frozen bread dough. You hear the scratch of imagined quills, ghostly sounds layered over the wind. As if the desert itself remembers, the man in russet robes begins humming, low and steady, something between a lullaby and a prayer. The sound weaves through the camp, calming restless animals and restless thoughts, and you too feel drowsy, swayed by this rhythm of carrying, protecting, preserving. It strikes you. These libraries didn't need marble pillars or gilded doors. They lived in the footsteps of those willing to walk endless miles for the sake of words. Someone tells a story of a scribe who memorized entire scrolls, reciting them by heart when parchment was too scarce. The library lived in his head, the storyteller says, tapping his temple with one crooked finger. You smile, because it sounds like an early version of audiobooks, except instead of earbuds you had to sit cross-legged in the sand, listening to a man with a scratchy throat. Practical? Maybe not. Magical? Definitely. As the camp drifts into silence, you hear only the distant shuffle of camels chewing cud, a sound as slow as the centuries themselves. Your eyelids droop, heavy with the weight of 1,000 forgotten texts, and you realize you're following not just a caravan of goods, but a caravan of memory. And like the sand that swallows footprints by morning, history threatens to erase it all unless someone, even a sleepy traveler like you, remembers. The fire dwindles, the last coals pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of the camp. You lean against a saddlebag, maybe dreaming, maybe not, and the desert hums with secrets that refuse to stay buried, carried instead on camel-back into another dawn. The night dissolves into morning, and you find yourself ducking through the flap of a felt yurt, stepping into a space that smells faintly of sheep's wool, ink, and damp earth. Inside, the air is warm, heavy with the mingled scents of boiled milk and dried herbs, and in the center, on low wooden stands, piles of scrolls sit stacked in neat but precarious towers. The light slips in through a hole in the roof, a sharp sunbeam that makes the dust motes look like tiny floating runes. You blink, and for a moment, it feels as though the air itself is writing around you. The nomads don't call this place a library. It's simply the tent. To them, storing words alongside saddle blankets and cooking pots is as ordinary as keeping flour in jars. Yet when you run your hand across the cracked leather wrappings, you sense the quiet hum of memory layered into parchment. Historians still argue whether these nomad collections were as extensive as legends claim or more like haphazard piles of useful scraps. But standing here, surrounded by brittle leaves, it doesn't matter. Every scrap feels monumental. A boy in saffron cloth kneels on a rug, carefully unrolling a scroll. His hands are clumsy, his eyes wide, and you recognize the expression. It's the same face someone makes the first time they try to microwave popcorn and realize it explodes like fireworks. The scroll unfurls to reveal blocky letters, the strokes uneven as if copied in haste. He reads aloud slowly, stumbling, and an elder beside him nods with approval. The lesson is clear. A library isn't just shelves of books. It's also the act of teaching the next mouth to speak the words. In the corner, a woman threads colored yarn through felt, her loom clacking softly. Beside her, a basket holds more than wool, slips of parchment folded between fabrics, hidden like treasure. It strikes you how fragile knowledge is here. Always one spilled pot of milk away from being ruined, always one careless ember away from turning into smoke. And yet it's also stubborn. Like weeds pushing through cracks in concrete, it finds a way to survive. A scholar visiting from far-off Samarkand gestures for you to sit. He dips a reed pen into ink so dark it looks like liquid night and scribbles notes on scraps of smooth birch bark. You lean closer and see lists of herbs, diagrams of horsetack, and even a half-finished poem. Knowledge here isn't divided into neat categories. It tumbles together, a stew of practical survival and wild imagination. You think of your modern web browser with 40 tabs open, each one chaotic but somehow necessary. Turns out the Silk Road had its own version of tab overload. Someone coughs deep and gravelly, breaking the quiet. A pile of manuscripts teeters, and you reach out instinctively, steadying it with both hands. The leather binding feels warm, as though it has absorbed the heat of every hand that's ever carried it. You imagine the scrolls traveling across deserts, through storms, over mountains, each crease a wrinkle earned on the road. These aren't pristine relics. They're scarred veterans, survivors of miles and mishaps. The elder explains how some scrolls are copied again and again because the originals wear thin. Sometimes in the process, whole sections vanish or new words creep in. You nod, amused, because it's like playing an ancient game of telephone. Except instead of ending with a silly phrase, you end up with a new version of history. And really, who's to say which is more accurate, the first version or the one that survived? As you listen, you hear laughter ripple through the tent. Someone jokes that camels, stubborn as they are, have eaten more knowledge than scholars ever have. Another adds, at least the camels digest quickly, unlike our debates. The whole tent chuckles, and you can't help but join. Though you're not entirely sure whether it's funny or just sleep deprivation, making everything seem absurd. The boy finishes his reading and looks at you shyly, waiting for approval. You give him a smile and he beams as though you've crowned him king of the caravan. In that grin, you sense why these fragile libraries mattered. Not just for scholars or rulers, but for children learning to see themselves as part of something bigger. Outside, the wind shifts, tugging at the tent walls. You realize that nothing here is permanent. Not the felt, not the scrolls, not even the people. And yet, by some quiet miracle, the words endure, clinging to parchment, to memory, to song. You step back into the light, carrying the image of that tent with you. A library without shelves, without marble halls, yet brimming with enough weight to anchor centuries. The desert hums softly, and the yurt behind you glows in the rising sun. A fragile beacon of ink and wool, standing stubbornly against the endless sand. The yurt shrinks behind you as the road stretches out, and soon your boots crunch on the gravel paths of a bustling Silk Road caravanserai. It's a fortress of stone and dust, walls thick enough to hold out bandits, with an arched gate yawning open to swallow travelers whole. Inside, the courtyard buzzes with life, camels kneeling under their burdens, donkeys braying, merchants shouting prices for silk, spices and paper. But amid this clamour, tucked into a shadowy alcove, lies something stranger. Scrolls traded like cinnamon, books stacked beside bolts of cloth. You pause at a stall where parchment is unrolled like fine silk. One trader, dressed in teal robes trimmed with gold thread, flicks open a manuscript with a flourish as though selling jewels. The ink is sharp, the illustrations vivid. Tiny horses galloping across margins like they're trying to escape. Persian poetry, he says, his accent thick but his pride universal. Another merchant offers Chinese medical treatises, their characters neat as combed hair. A third waves a palm leaf manuscript from India, the letters inked in looping lines that curl like vines. The air itself seems thick with alphabets, each one whispering in a tongue you almost understand but not quite. And here's the wild part. Manuscripts weren't just sold as objects of learning. They were sometimes traded for camels, armor, even sacks of grain. Imagine a farmer back home bartering his pickup truck for a stack of cookbooks, and you'll get the idea. Historians still argue how widespread this manuscript trade really was, but the idea sticks. Knowledge wasn't just priceless, it had a literal price tag, stamped in the clink of coins and the grunt of beasts. A scribe in russet robes sits cross-legged in the corner, surrounded by jars of ink. His reed pen scratches so quickly, it sounds like a beetle gnawing wood. He's copying a medical recipe from one parchment onto another, and you lean close enough to catch the words, honey, vinegar, ground pearls, because nothing screams medicine like grinding up jewelry. You almost chuckle, imagining a medieval Yelp review. Cured my cough, but now I'm broke. Overhead pigeons flutter and coo, their feathers drifting into the courtyard like misplaced punctuation marks. You wonder how many priceless manuscripts have tiny bird droppings speckled in their margins. Probably more than scholars would like to admit. As night falls, oil lamps sputter to life, filling the caravanserai with the golden hush of flickering light. A group gathers near the center, their rugs spread wide, their voices weaving stories into the air. One tells of a lost library swallowed by a sandstorm, manuscripts buried so deep even the camels forgot the way. Another insists he once saw a book that glowed faintly in the dark, ink made with crushed fireflies. You can't tell if they're lying, half believing, or just entertaining themselves while waiting for morning. But the stories stick to you like burrs. And then there's the smell. Thick stew bubbling in clay pots, spiced with cumin and coriander, the scent wrapping itself around the words being spoken. You sip from a borrowed bowl, the broth salty, the chunks of lamb chewy but comforting. Somewhere across the courtyard, a lute strums lazily, its notes curling into the night air like smoke. Knowledge, food, music, it all blends together, a sensory soup that tastes like history itself. Someone taps your shoulder, pressing a slim scroll into your hands. The parchment feels fragile, edges crumbling like dried leaves. Inside, the script is uneven, hurried as if written during a storm. It's not a grand text, it's a caravan ledger listing spices, bolts of silk, names of donkeys. Yet you realize this too is history. Libraries aren't just filled with epics and philosophies, they're also built on grocery lists and shipping manifests. In 1,000 years, who knows? Someone might study your old emails about buying cat food with the same reverence. The stars creep higher, and the lamps burn lower, their flames bowing under the weight of midnight. You roll the scroll back up and hand it gently to the merchant, who tucks it away with the care of someone handling both treasure and tinder. Around you, the noise quiets, travelers curling into blankets, camels folding into themselves like awkward origami. You lie down on a rug near the gate, staring up at a square of sky framed by stone walls. The night feels enormous, and you sense the faint hum of knowledge flowing all around, packed into bags, whispered across tongues, inked on paper. A caravanserai might look like a resting place, but it's also a junction where entire worlds pass each other in the dark. And tonight, you are one more listener, one more carrier of stories, drifting into sleep under the watch of stars that have seen every scroll and every trader before you. Dawn slides across the courtyard like a cautious guest, spilling pale light over stone walls and sleepy camels. You wake to the sound of hooves scraping, merchants shouting, and the unmistakable cough of a donkey that sounds suspiciously like it's judging your life choices. The caravanserai is stirring again, and with it, the trade in not only spices and silks but words, those fragile packages of ink, bound in leather or palm leaf. You notice a small group huddled near the gate, their robes in shades of indigo and saffron, their packs bulging not with grain or rugs, but with scrolls carefully wrapped in cloth. These are the book carriers, a rare breed of traveller who moved not caravans of goods but caravans of knowledge. Some were professional scribes looking for commissions. Others were teachers wandering between towns. A few were just fanatics, obsessed with collecting texts the way some folks today hoard sneakers. You can almost picture one muttering, "Yes, I need a fourth copy of that astronomy manual, thank you very much." As they prepare to leave, you notice the sheer variety of what they carry. One man hefts a bundle of Chinese bamboo slips, etched with characters that look like rows of tiny trees. Another cradles a Persian codex, its pages gilded at the edges, shimmering in the morning light like treasure. A third carefully balances palm leaf manuscripts, strung together with cord, their edges dark from countless fingers. The books themselves look like a caravan, different shapes, languages, and textures, all journeying side by side. You fall in step as they leave the gates, heading into the endless ribbon of the Silk Road. The wind bites sharp across the plains, tugging at your cloak, making the scrolls rattle faintly in their wrappings. The scribe in russet robes, your beetle pen friend from last night, murmurs that texts often traveled farther than their authors ever did. A medical recipe from India might end up in a Mongol outpost, while Greek philosophy copied in Baghdad could wind up in a scholar's hut in Samarkand. Knowledge had more frequent flyer miles than any human, and yet it wasn't always safe. Bandits didn't care whether they were stealing silk or scrolls, and rainstorms could turn parchment to mush in minutes. Some carriers wrapped their texts in waxed leather. Others stuffed them inside sealed jars, hoping clay would outlast weather. Historians still debate how many manuscripts were lost not to time or neglect, but to the hazards of travel itself. Mud, mold, or a poorly tied saddlebag bouncing against a mule's ribs. Imagine the heartbreak of watching Aristotle tumble off the back of a donkey into a puddle. Sorry, brother, Aristotle's gone. But hey, the mule looks smarter now. Midday heat begins to press down, the horizon quivering with mirage. The group halts in the shadow of a ruined watchtower, its stones crumbling but still dignified. Someone unrolls a parchment map, not of roads but of trade winds and seasonal rains. The idea hits you. Knowledge wasn't just traded, it was needed to trade. Without astronomy, merchants couldn't track seasons. Without medical texts, travelers succumbed to desert fevers. Without records, debts and deals dissolved into chaos. Books didn't just ride the Silk Road. They built it over lunch, flatbread torn and shared, dates sticky on your fingers. You hear stories of libraries so vast they could fuel caravans for months. One traveler swears he saw shelves of paper stacked like bricks in Bukhara, each one guarded by stern librarians, with eyes sharper than swords. Another laughs, insisting that the Mongols once left scrolls lying around as kindling for their campfires, because even the most brilliant poetry couldn't compete with a freezing night. Which story is true? Historians still argue, their debates as fiery as the campfires those scrolls may or may not have fed. As the sun dips low, the caravan sets off again, shadows stretching like tired arms across the plain. You catch glimpses of villagers rushing out with bowls, offering milk or bread in exchange for a page copied, a letter read aloud, a prayer transcribed. In a world where literacy was rare, these book carriers were magicians. They turned ink into voices, parchment into bridges, letters into food. Imagine if your Uber driver also doubled as your librarian. That's how strange and indispensable they must have seemed. The road grows darker, the stars pricking awake one by one. The caravan hums with the quiet creak of leather straps, the slow grind of wheels, the steady rhythm of hooves. You lean into the motion, almost lulled, as though the caravan itself is a book being read aloud. Each step a line, each mile a chapter. And you realize you're not just traveling with merchants and scribes, but with centuries of thought strapped across the backs of beasts. Ideas are moving here quietly, stubbornly, as unstoppable as the road itself. By the time the moon rises, pale and round as a seal stamped on parchment, you're drifting again. The scrolls sway gently in their wrappings, like cradles rocked by invisible hands, and you think, the world is written in motion. The libraries aren't buildings. They're caravans stitched together by footsteps and faith, carrying knowledge through the dark, one creak and rattle at a time. The caravan presses on, but your path bends now toward the edge of a windswept desert, where sand rolls like restless waves. The stars glitter overhead, clear as ink on vellum, and the dunes shimmer faintly under moonlight as if someone dusted them with powdered glass. You hear the steady huff of camels and the soft rustle of parchment inside sealed cases, and you realize this isn't just a road, it's a gamble. Each dune is a page waiting to swallow the text it carries. A scribe trudging beside you mutters about past disasters, entire caravans buried in sudden sandstorms, their manuscripts lost forever under shifting dunes. He tells you of a rumored library somewhere beneath the desert, a buried trove of scrolls preserved by the dryness, waiting like a time capsule. Historians still argue whether such lost libraries of sand truly exist, or whether they're just campfire exaggerations passed from one anxious traveler to another. Either way, it's a haunting thought that a masterpiece could sit a few feet under your boots, forgotten for centuries, while you complain about sand in your sandals. As dawn cracks open the sky with streaks of rose and saffron, the desert heat builds like an oven. Camels sway under the weight of crates stuffed with fragile texts, each step shaking dust into cracks of leather. A weary novice checks the bindings on a chest, whispering prayers as though words alone could keep termites and heat at bay. You imagine him as the medieval version of a paranoid IT guy. Did I back this up? Did I double knot the rope? Please don't let Aristotle get corrupted again. The sand itself becomes an enemy. Grains slip into seams, scratch the ink, and sometimes blot entire lines into unreadable smudges. To protect against this, some scribes carried small brushes made of horsehair, gently sweeping manuscripts the way you'd dust crumbs off a laptop keyboard. It's oddly tender work, almost parental, caring for texts as though they were fragile children. You can almost hear the whisper of brush against parchment, like a lullaby sung to ink. By midday, the desert's cruelty bares its teeth. Lips crack, tempers fray, and someone half jokes that they'd trade 3 Aristotle manuscripts for a cold melon. The irony isn't lost on you. Priceless texts risk destruction in a land where even water feels like legend. Yet the very dryness of this landscape is why some manuscripts survived at all. While damp climates rotted parchment, here the sand sometimes embalmed it, preserving voices that would have otherwise dissolved. So in a twisted way, the desert was both thief and guardian, snatching some scrolls forever, but sheltering others for future eyes. Evening brings relief. A caravanserai appears at the horizon, its walls low and square, promising water, shade, and the faint luxury of sitting without sand between your toes. You sink onto a mat inside, listening to traders swap stories. One speaks of caves in the Taklamakan, where scrolls were hidden centuries earlier, their words still bright and sharp when rediscovered. Another scoffs, saying such tales are exaggerated, that most of those libraries are nothing but sand, bones, and wishful thinking. Scholars still debate, he insists, how many of those desert finds were genuine caches versus fragments of ordinary trade, accidentally preserved. The night inside the caravanserai hums with a different rhythm. Wind slaps at the wooden gates, but within the courtyard, lamps cast small halos of gold on parchment bundles stacked neatly against walls. Scribes crouch near them, repairing frayed edges with paste, muttering about lost pages as though scolding wayward children. There's humor in it. Imagine staying up late not to finish homework, but to stitch together Aristotle's missing paragraphs because a camel sneezed at the wrong time. You close your eyes, lulled by the slow repetition of quills scratching and the creak of casks being stacked. The desert, with all its threats, seems to fade for a moment. You can almost picture those rumored hidden libraries, vaults beneath dunes, scrolls wrapped in silence, ink resting patiently in the dark. Whether they exist or not, the idea comforts you. Somewhere knowledge may be waiting, perfectly preserved like a lullaby stored in a bottle of sand, and as the lamps dim, your breath falls into rhythm with the soft sigh of the desert wind. It feels as if the whole caravan, every camel and every scroll is exhaling at once, relieved to have survived another crossing, hopeful for the dawn. The desert air cools overnight, crisp enough that your breath feels like it could crystallize, but the stillness doesn't last. By mid-morning, the caravan is moving again, and you find yourself watching the dust rise in shimmering plumes. This isn't the gentle march of scholars or the sleepy sway of camels. This stretch is infamous. Bandits lurk here, and their eyes aren't fixed on silks or spices. They know that the chests strapped to your camels are filled with something rarer, manuscripts bound in hide, carrying wisdom worth more than coin. You imagine the absurdity of it, a group of bandits whispering, "Forget the gold, grab the Aristotle." But in truth, scrolls and books were ransom in their own right. Rare texts could be sold to rival lords, bartered for safe passage, or even cut apart for their valuable parchment. Historians still argue over how often texts were deliberately targeted, compared to being looted incidentally, but the possibility alone was enough to send scribes into cold sweats. You'd probably feel the same if you carried your entire cloud storage on one camel. The path narrows between cliffs, a perfect ambush site. The riders at the caravan's edge tighten their grips on spears, their horses restless. The chests of scrolls seem to creak louder than usual, betraying their worth like nervous children. A sudden cry cuts the air, and you glimpse shadows moving fast, men on horseback with faces wrapped in cloth. It's a strange contrast, the silence of the manuscripts and the violence they draw. When the bandits close in, chaos erupts. Camels bawl, riders shout, and one chest tumbles from a pack, bursting open like a piñata of parchment. Pages flutter into the sky, scattering across the sand like startled birds. For a second, it's almost beautiful, knowledge flying free, written lines dancing on the wind. Then reality snaps back, as monks scramble to snatch the pages before hoofbeats grind them into dust. You duck behind a dune, clutching a leather-bound codex pressed against your chest. The cover smells of smoke and ink, oddly calming despite the clash around you. There's humor in the thought. Everyone else clings to swords, and here you are hugging a book like it's a teddy bear. Still, in a world where scrolls could tip the balance of power, maybe the book is sharper than the sword. The skirmish doesn't last long. A few coins tossed, a couple of barrels sacrificed, and the bandits peel away, satisfied for now. They leave behind the shaken silence of a caravan half unpacked, pages fluttering in the wind like wounded birds. Scribes kneel, brushing sand from manuscripts, murmuring over smudged ink as though over injured kin. "It's not too bad," one insists, holding up a scroll with a hole right through the middle. You can't help but think it looks like history itself, just got edited by an angry camel's hoof. By late afternoon, the caravan regroups. The salvaged texts are tied more tightly, riders more watchful, every shadow eyed with suspicion. The danger lingers like a bad taste. You know the bandits could return or another group could appear. Yet there's also a strange resolve that settles over the travelers. Knowledge, even when threatened, is worth carrying. And maybe in a twisted way the bandits proved it. After all, no one risks their life to steal onions. That evening, campfires crackle nervously. Traders mutter about safer routes, scribes lament lost pages, and you sip watered wine, feeling the adrenaline drain into weariness. A scribe beside you sighs, "We guard these words like treasure." But the sand steals them faster than swords. He may be right, but you also notice the way he tucks the repaired scrolls gently under his cloak, as if protecting a heartbeat. The night deepens. Beyond the circle of firelight, the desert yawns dark and endless. You can still picture the parchment scraps flying in the skirmish, like snow in a place that never knows winter. Some of them were lost forever, carried who knows where to vanish in the dunes, but others were saved, stitched back together, ready to travel further. In that balance between loss and rescue, you sense the fragile heartbeat of these libraries, never secure, always moving yet somehow enduring. And as you lie back, the stars overhead seem to mirror the scattered pages, countless, fragile and glowing with meaning only if someone pauses to look. Morning rises over the desert, and you wake to the creak of camels kneeling, their long necks swaying like ships in harbor. The caravan stretches thin against the horizon, a wavering line of fabric, hides, and hopeful faces. The sun isn't yet merciless, but you know it will be, and the manuscripts ride with you like quiet passengers, swaddled in leather, muttering silently about survival. If last night was about avoiding blades, today is about enduring distance. The Silk Road wasn't just one road, it was a tangled braid of paths, some better known, others whispered about only by veterans. Traders argued endlessly over which route was safest, fastest, or most profitable. Historians still debate how often caravans chose southern paths through oasis towns or northern tracks that skirted mountains. But one thing is certain, each choice carried risk. You can feel it in your stomach, the same way you might second-guess whether to trust that GPS shortcut through roads that may not exist. Your route today threads toward an oasis town, one of those shimmering dots of green in a map otherwise ruled by sand. Imagine the relief. Palms rising like a mirage, shallow pools glimmering under sunlight, laughter breaking out as travelers finally splash faces and refill skins. To you, it feels like arriving at a roadside gas station after running the tank on empty. Only this stop has dates hanging heavy on branches. And the store clerk is a camel herder, demanding grain instead of dollars. At the edge of the oasis, you spot more than merchants. Scribes set up shaded cloths, unrolling parchment to air it out, fanning the pages so mold doesn't creep in from the damp. A boy runs past carrying a jug, nearly tipping it onto an open codex, and earns a shout so fierce it could curdle milk. Knowledge, after all, is more fragile than water and harder to replace. You imagine the monks scolding children today for spilling juice on laptops. It's the same principle, just with fewer camels. Inside the town, life hums. Caravans meet, news crosses faster than wind, and libraries, yes, libraries, sometimes flicker into existence. Not permanent ones with stone walls and pillars, but temporary rooms in caravanserais where travelers share, copy, or even trade manuscripts. You picture a dim hall where by torchlight, a Persian trader loans a scroll of poetry to a Chinese scholar, who in return gifts a text on astronomy. No coin changes hands, only ink. It's like an ancient Dropbox, but with more donkeys braying in the background. You sip watered wine in a corner, eavesdropping as a scribe complains, "The Mongols demand tolls again. More parchment for them, less for us." Another trader insists he heard of a new path, safer, faster. A scholar murmurs that a manuscript he carried from Samarkand is already being copied here, its words multiplying like sparks. And you realize that these oasis towns weren't just pit stops, they were accelerators of knowledge, places where books bred like rabbits. Of course, danger never disappeared. Bandits might circle outside, waiting for caravans to leave town. Local rulers could tax heavily, sometimes seizing manuscripts under the excuse of inspection, and occasionally fire claimed entire halls before a text could travel onward. Historians still puzzle over how many manuscripts perished in forgotten fires or simply rotted in damp storerooms. Each one is a reminder that for every volume preserved, many more dissolved into memory's sand. But tonight, as torches flicker and voices mingle, you sense something remarkable. The manuscripts breathe easier here, less like prisoners on camels, more like guests at a banquet. Their pages flutter softly in the evening breeze, almost eager, as if they too long for companionship after weeks trapped in silence. Her scholar reads aloud a line of verse and laughter ripples through the courtyard, words shared, alive, not hoarded. Later, as the caravan prepares to move on, you stand at the edge of the oasis and glance back. The palm fronds whisper in the wind, the pools reflect firelight, and somewhere inside a dim hall fresh copies of texts now exist that didn't yesterday. The road is harsh, but here knowledge multiplied. The thought settles like cool water in your chest. When you climb back onto the camel, the stars above are already pricking the sky, sharp and countless. The caravan sways forward, leaving the oasis behind, and you carry with you not just manuscripts, but the hum of voices, the shimmer of ink freshly dried, and the faint, absurd hope that maybe words are tougher than the desert itself. The desert night stretches wide, stars scattering like spilled salt across velvet. You sway gently on the camel's back, lulled by the beast's slow rhythm, half dreaming, half alert. Somewhere in the shadows, another caravan hums the same tune. Bells clinking, leather straps groaning, a chorus of weary footsteps. And among all this, the manuscripts sit bundled close, pages pressed together as if whispering secrets to themselves. Traveling by night is not just poetic, it's survival. The heat of day can roast you like bread in an oven, so caravans often chose the cool darkness instead. But there's danger too. The world at night is smaller, shapes blurred, sound amplified. A cough echoes like thunder. The crunch of sand underfoot feels like betrayal. You imagine it's the medieval version of creeping downstairs at midnight for a snack, except if you drop the spoon, you risk alerting bandits. And oh, the bandits. You sense them even when you can't see them. Those lean figures who haunt the dunes waiting for caravans burdened with silk, spices, and precious books. Some were opportunists, others nearly professional organizations. Historians still argue whether certain nomadic groups were more like raiding companies than ragged thieves. But to you, it hardly matters. The manuscripts tremble in their cases all the same. The caravan leaders aren't foolish. Ahead, riders with spears pace the dunes, torches swaying like fiery antennae. You picture them as the original security guards, except their hourly pay is measured in dates and water skins. One whispers to another, pointing toward the horizon. You squint and catch a flicker, movement where there shouldn't be. The tension settles over everyone like dust, and then the scare, a shout, a rush of hooves, the sharp flare of torches. The caravan tightens, people pressing close. The manuscripts are pulled deeper into the center, surrounded by layers of bodies and beasts. You hold your breath as shadows approach, rough voices spilling out of the dark. There's a brief standoff, words traded, blades glinting. The manuscripts feel like a fragile secret in a world that wants only plunder. But then, as suddenly as it rose, the threat dissolves. Perhaps the bandits decide this caravan is too well defended, or maybe some deal is struck. Grain given, safe passage bought. The riders vanish back into the night, and the caravan exhales all at once. You feel your shoulders sag, the manuscripts still safe, though their leather covers seem damp with fear. The road presses on. Hours pass in silence, except for the occasional groan of camels and the low murmur of prayers. Someone mutters a tale of a caravan last year that wasn't so lucky, its manuscripts scattered across the sand like torn leaves. Historians still debate how many such collections vanished, how many entire libraries dissolved into the desert, with no trace. You imagine dunes swallowing words, each grain of sand a syllable erased, and yet survival is its own kind of miracle. When dawn finally edges over the horizon, you glimpse the caravan intact, moving as one. The sun spills light over tired faces, over camels gnawing lazily, over bundles of manuscripts that look almost smug in their survival. You laugh quietly. It's the sort of smugness you'd expect from someone who just avoided disaster by a hair. You dismount briefly, stretching stiff legs, and the desert feels different in morning light. Harsh, yes, but also vast, like an open page waiting to be written on. And the manuscripts, tucked into leather, seem to hum along with that thought. Every day survived is another chance for their words to continue. You climb back onto the camel, shoulders aching but spirit steady. The desert stretches ahead, long and endless, but you feel the weight of survival like a hidden strength. Last night proved something. These manuscripts, like the people who guard them, are stubborn, and maybe stubbornness is the strongest ink of all. The night's unease lingers like smoke, but the caravan doesn't slow. By midday, the desert blurs into scrubland, patches of green surprising your eyes after so much sand. And there, beneath a canopy of woven cloth, sits a tent unlike the others. Larger, its poles capped with bronze, its flaps stitched with patterns that shimmer in sunlight. This is no merchant's shelter. This is a royal tent, a place where tribute is gathered and history itself is bartered. You duck inside, the air heavy with incense and roasted meat. Cushions spill across the floor, embroidered with patterns that catch your gaze. At the center, reclining on a dais of carpets, the Khan waits. Broad-shouldered, his robe dyed deep indigo, a color as rare and costly as the silks piled beside him. Around him stand guards in russet tunics, spears upright, faces stern. This is a man who commands both fear and stories, and today he demands tribute not just of wealth but of wisdom. One by one, traders kneel, laying offerings at his feet. Horses, bolts of saffron cloth, sacks of spice so pungent they make your eyes water. And then finally a leather bundle is untied. Out spill scrolls, vellum lined with cramped Persian, papyrus painted with Chinese brushstrokes, even a brittle piece of palm leaf script from far India. The Khan lifts one gently, frowning at the characters he cannot read, yet nodding with satisfaction. For him, the value is not in the words but in the prestige of owning them. You watch with a mix of awe and irony. The manuscripts, so carefully guarded through storms and raids, now treated as trophies. It's a bit like watching someone buy an antique book to decorate their living room, never bothering to open it. You almost want to lean over and whisper, "It's not just wallpaper, you know." Still, knowledge has its politics. The Khan knows that a library, nomadic though it may be, makes him look powerful, sophisticated, worthy of respect from foreign envoys. Historians still debate whether these rulers truly valued learning, or simply the image of it. Perhaps it was both. A scroll could be as useful as a sword, depending on how it was displayed. Around the tent, scribes hover, recording the exchanges on wax tablets and parchment scraps. They jot notes in multiple languages, hands moving as quickly as flies on honey. You imagine them muttering under their breath. Another 10 scrolls to the Khan's collection. Oh, and a goat, don't forget the goat. Even bureaucracy has its humor. Then a curious moment. A small trembling merchant steps forward, clutching a bundle wrapped in teal cloth. He lays it down, and when the cloth is pulled back it reveals not silk or jewels but a single battered manuscript. The Khan tilts his head, interested. The merchant explains in hurried tones. It is an ancient text passed down through his family, said to contain remedies for fevers and plagues. The Khan leans closer, intrigued not by wealth this time but by usefulness. His interest sharpens like a hawk spotting prey, and you realize something profound. These libraries in motion weren't only treasures, they were tools of survival. In a world where disease could sweep through like wildfire, a scrap of medical advice might matter more than gold. A ruler who held such knowledge might hold life itself in his grasp. The tent buzzes with murmurs, deals struck, laughter rising. Musicians pluck lutes in the corner, their strings weaving through the chatter. The manuscripts lie stacked like bricks of invisible power, each page a fragment of authority. You picture them not as books but as coins, currency of intellect passed hand to hand, traded, hoarded, sometimes lost. As you leave the tent blinking in the bright sun, the desert wind feels cooler against your face. The royal guards lift the bundles of manuscripts as if they were barrels of wine, carrying them deeper into the Khan's private store. You catch yourself smiling wryly. In this world, libraries don't sit in marble halls. They walk into tents, change hands with bribes, and sleep under carpets alongside Khans, and maybe that's the charm. Knowledge, like the people who carry it, is restless. It wanders, bends, and survives in places where you least expect it. You step back toward the caravan, the image of that royal tent lingering in your mind, its rugs, its incense, its scrolls stacked high like trophies, and wonder how many stories have been bartered away in just such places. The caravan presses on, wheels creaking, hooves kicking up clouds of ochre dust. Evening settles like a shawl over the land, and the horizon glows faintly red, as though some enormous hearth fire has been stoked behind the mountains. The wind carries the smell of roasted lamb and smoke, but also something sharper, ink fresh and metallic, as if manuscripts themselves are breathing out their secrets. You follow that scent to a smaller campfire at the edge of the caravan. There, under a canopy of stars, sits a cluster of scribes. They're wrapped in russet and teal cloaks, their faces lined with fatigue, quills scratching on stretched parchment. Their knees serve as desks, inkpots balanced precariously on stones. Around them, torches flicker, casting jittery shadows that make them look like a strange flock of nightbirds. These are the copyists, the unsung heroes of the nomad libraries. They don't get royal tents or fat tributes. Instead, they labor in the margins, literally and figuratively, making duplicates before the originals vanish into some Khan's vault. You lean closer and see the variety. One writes in Persian Naskh script, the letters looping like flowing water. Another in Syriac, with sharp little angles. A third in Chinese brushstrokes, steady even in the desert wind. It's like watching a medieval version of simultaneous translation, except with more ink stains and fewer microphones. One scribe pauses, shakes his cramped hand, and mutters something under his breath. Another chuckles, dipping his quill again, remarking that if their masters truly wanted eternal knowledge, they might at least invest in better stools. You smirk because apparently back pain is as timeless as wisdom. A bundle of scrolls sits to the side waiting to be copied. Some are medical treatises, others religious hymns, a few simply inventories of trade goods, lists of who owed camels to whom. The scribes don't discriminate. To them, a debt record and a mystical poem, both deserve ink, both need to survive the trek. Historians still debate how much of what was copied in these wandering libraries was high art versus everyday paperwork. Perhaps half the miracle was that any of it survived at all. The rhythm of quills scratching mixes with the crackle of the fire. Fair boy apprentice no more than 12 leans over, tongue sticking out in concentration as he tries to copy the curve of a difficult letter. His master corrects him gently, tracing the line with a fingertip. The boy nods solemnly, as if this single stroke carries the weight of entire generations. And maybe it does. You imagine how fragile it all was. A dropped lamp could reduce months of work to ash, A sudden raid could scatter the manuscripts like autumn leaves, and yet these scribes kept at it, night after night, trusting that their labor meant something. It's almost like watching monks transcribe in stone abbeys, except here the ceiling is the desert sky, and the choir is made of camels groaning in the dark. Humor flickers too. One scribe smears ink across his cheek absent-mindedly, looking for all the world like a warrior with war paint, though his battlefield is parchment. Another scribbles a tiny doodle of a goat in the margin, perhaps out of boredom, perhaps as a secret joke for the future. You grin because it feels oddly familiar, like those times you doodled in the corner of a notebook during a lecture, pretending to take notes. Some habits, it seems, are eternal. As the night deepens, the fire burns low and the scribes keep scratching, their breath misting in the cooling air. The stars above feel like ink blots themselves, scattered across the parchment of the sky. And you realize that this quiet, relentless copying is what kept the libraries alive. Not the khans, not the tributes, not even the great caravans, but the tired men with sore backs and inky fingers who refuse to let words die in the dust. You pull your cloak tighter, listening to the rustle of parchment and the sigh of quills. And in that steady rhythm you hear something deeper, the sound of knowledge refusing to vanish, carried not in stone towers, but in the stubborn patience of hands. Morning breaks pale and reluctant, the sun edging over the dunes like a lamp turned too low. You stir from sleep with sand in your hair and the faint taste of ash in your mouth, and as you rise the caravan is already in motion. Wheels groan, camels snort, and somewhere ahead the faint clang of bells announces a river crossing. The air smells brighter, greener, like reeds waking up after a night of silence. You follow the crowd and see it, a broad ribbon of water cutting through the dust, its surface flashing silver in the dawn light. The banks are crowded with travelers, merchants unloading goods, horses drinking greedily, children splashing as though this were a festival instead of a stopover. And in the middle of this whirl, the manuscripts appear again, borne carefully in bundles swaddled in indigo cloth. They look less like books and more like sleeping infants, guarded with the same desperate tenderness. Crossing a river with fragile texts is a ridiculous gamble. One slip, one loose grip, and centuries of wisdom dissolve into unreadable pulp. You watch as scribes knot their parcels tight and perch on rafts made of inflated goatskins. Yes, goatskins, bobbing absurdly like balloons under the weight of memory. A scribe clutches his bundle with the same expression you might wear holding your phone over a toilet. Utter terror, wrapped in determination. The boatmen tease them, laughing that a manuscript won't feed anyone if it sinks. But still they steer carefully, guiding the little rafts across the current. Some scribes close their eyes, whispering prayers under their breath. You think of how monks once sprinkled holy water on brewing vats, convinced it kept demons away. Here the same faith clings to bundles of paper. Different cargo, same superstition. On the far bank, villagers wait with reed mats to help dry whatever gets damp. One scroll is unrolled in the sun, its ink blurring slightly but still legible. A boy leans too close, fascinated, until a scribe shoos him away with a stern flap of his hand. The boy giggles and runs off, splashing in the mud. Perhaps one day he'll tell stories of the time he almost ruined a scholar's treasure. Historians still debate how much knowledge was truly lost in rivers like this. Some say countless texts vanished into water, their stories gone forever. Others argue scribes copied redundantly, ensuring that even if one set drowned, another would survive. The truth likely lives somewhere in between, floating like driftwood. Half preserved, half gone, you can almost laugh at the absurdity. Imagine carrying fragile parchment halfway across Asia, only to watch it sink because some camel decided to sneeze mid-crossing. The image sticks, ridiculous and tragic at once. The grand lost library ending not in flames or conquest, but in a soggy bundle floating downstream. Yet, against all odds, most survive. You watch as the scribes gather their cargo, counting each bundle twice, thrice, as though numbers alone can keep them safe. The sun climbs higher, drying pages and skin alike, and the caravan pushes onward, leaving the river behind with nothing but ripples and a faint smell of wet parchment. And as you walk with them, feet squelching in damp boots, you realize that knowledge didn't just travel over sand. It floated, it swayed, it risked drowning, and still it made the journey. Every splash of water, every trembling hand on a raft was part of the long story of survival, the story you're now tracing step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat, across the Silk Road. The damp weight of river air fades as the caravan climbs into higher ground, where the wind grows thin and sharp enough to sting your face. You feel the crunch of frost under your boots, and soon the tents that rise along the trail are not draped in dusty canvas, but in heavy wool, their seams lined with ice. Here in the cold edge of mountains, the libraries take on a different form. Knowledge no longer rides openly in bright cloth. It hides buried deep, sleeping under snow like seeds waiting for spring. You see them working at dawn, hands stiff in the chill, packing scrolls into hide sacks. The hides are greased thick with tallow to keep moisture out, then stitched shut with thread coarse as rope. Men and women together haul the sacks into caves carved by centuries of wind, stacking them behind stone walls. Some texts are buried in pits lined with straw, then sealed with frozen clay, as if the mountain itself is being asked to keep the memory safe. The whole process looks more like storing root vegetables than storing wisdom. But in truth, both are survival foods, one for the body, one for the mind. A grey-bearded scholar mutters that paper fares better in the cold, that ink bites more deeply into frozen fibers. Maybe he's right, maybe it's wishful thinking. Historians still argue whether these caches preserved more texts or destroyed them, since freezing keeps pests away, but brittle parchment can snap like glass when mishandled. You imagine future archaeologists digging one up and finding only a pile of unreadable shards, like confetti from a forgotten celebration. Still, the practice persists. Children watch as their elders stack the sacks and whisper instructions. Remember this cave. Mark it with stones. Never speak of it to strangers. The cave mouth is then disguised with brushwood, as though no one had ever entered. To the untrained eye, it looks like just another frozen hollow in a sea of identical rocks. You can almost picture a modern hiker stumbling upon it centuries later, kicking aside some brush, and suddenly discovering what looks like an ancient filing cabinet hidden in ice. The humor of it isn't lost on you. Imagine all that effort. Tallow, straw, stone walls, only for some wandering goat to chew through the disguise and scatter a page across the snow. Somewhere a scholar would probably faint while a goat burps up a line of poetry. Survival and absurdity always seem to march side by side, but what strikes you most is the quiet reverence. No chanting, no grand ceremonies, just the steady work of hands numbed by cold, saving words for futures they'll never see. You lean into the cave with them, the air sharp and thin, and watch a young girl trace the edge of a parchment before it disappears into darkness. She whispers something, maybe a prayer, maybe a promise, and then the sack is sealed. Her voice lingers in the chill like frost. The caravan moves on, leaving behind these hidden shrines of memory. The snow crunches underfoot. The wind rattles the tents, and the mountains loom like silent guardians. You realize that here preservation isn't just an act of devotion, it's an act of faith. Faith that words will outlast storms. Faith that memory can hibernate through centuries. Faith that one day, someone will thaw the silence and read again. And as you breathe out, your own exhale turns white, curling upward like smoke, vanishing into the same frozen air that now shelters the Lost Nomad Libraries. The damp weight of river air fades as the caravan climbs into higher ground, where the wind grows thin and sharp enough to sting your face. You feel the crunch of frost under your boots, and soon the tents that rise along the trail are not draped in dusty canvas, but in heavy wool, their seams lined with ice. Here in the cold edge of mountains, the libraries take on a different form. Knowledge no longer rides openly in bright cloth. It hides buried deep, sleeping under snow like seeds waiting for spring. You see them working at dawn, hands stiff in the chill, packing scrolls into hide sacks. The hides are greased thick with tallow to keep moisture out, then stitched shut with thread coarse as rope. Men and women together haul the sacks into caves carved by centuries of wind, stacking them behind stone walls. Some texts are buried in pits lined with straw, then sealed with frozen clay, as if the mountain itself is being asked to keep the memory safe. The whole process looks more like storing root vegetables than storing wisdom. But in truth, both are survival foods, one for the body, one for the mind. A grey-bearded scholar mutters that paper fares better in the cold, that ink bites more deeply into frozen fibers. Maybe he's right, maybe it's wishful thinking. Historians still argue whether these caches preserved more texts or destroyed them, since freezing keeps pests away, but brittle parchment can snap like glass when mishandled. You imagine future archaeologists digging one up and finding only a pile of unreadable shards, like confetti from a forgotten celebration. Still, the practice persists. Children watch as their elders stack the sacks and whisper instructions. Remember this cave. Mark it with stones. Never speak of it to strangers. The cave mouth is then disguised with brushwood, as though no one had ever entered. To the untrained eye, it looks like just another frozen hollow in a sea of identical rocks. You can almost picture a modern hiker stumbling upon it centuries later, kicking aside some brush, and suddenly discovering what looks like an ancient filing cabinet hidden in ice. The humor of it isn't lost on you. Imagine all that effort. Tallow, straw, stone walls, only for some wandering goat to chew through the disguise and scatter a page across the snow. Somewhere a scholar would probably faint while a goat burps up a line of poetry. Survival and absurdity always seem to march side by side, but what strikes you most is the quiet reverence. No chanting, no grand ceremonies, just the steady work of hands numbed by cold, saving words for futures they'll never see. You lean into the cave with them, the air sharp and thin, and watch a young girl trace the edge of a parchment before it disappears into darkness. She whispers something, maybe a prayer, maybe a promise, and then the sack is sealed. Her voice lingers in the chill like frost. The caravan moves on, leaving behind these hidden shrines of memory. The snow crunches underfoot. The wind rattles the tents, and the mountains loom like silent guardians. You realize that here preservation isn't just an act of devotion, it's an act of faith. Faith that words will outlast storms. Faith that memory can hibernate through centuries. Faith that one day, someone will thaw the silence and read again. And as you breathe out, your own exhale turns white, curling upward like smoke, vanishing into the same frozen air that now shelters the Lost Nomad Libraries. The golden grasslands fade behind you, and the world shifts again into the hum of markets, where the Silk Road's pulse beats loudest. Here knowledge doesn't sleep in caves or sway on camelbacks. It's traded hand to hand, word for coin, book for spice. The air is thick with cumin, dust, and the smoke of cooking fires. Stalls overflow with silk and porcelain, but tucked between bolts of cloth and baskets of almonds, you notice scrolls stacked casually, as if they were no more exotic than onions. You lean closer, and the sellers bark their pitches. One boasts that his manuscript contains the wisdom of the Greeks, though it's really a rough translation of Aristotle, with half the pages missing. Another swears his scroll of medicine can cure any illness, though you suspect it's more superstition than science. Buyers haggle fiercely anyway, because even the rumor of knowledge carries weight. And you realize something both funny and a little tragic. Books on the Silk Road weren't just treasures. Sometimes they were scams. Imagine shelling out a small fortune for Plato's secret philosophy, only to find someone's grocery list scribbled in the margins. Still, amidst the chaos, real treasures changed hands. Chinese traders slipped Buddhist sutras into cloth bundles bound for Persia. Persian merchants sold astronomical charts to Indian scholars, who copied them before sending them further west. Words moved as easily as spices, scattered by wind and bargain. A recipe for ink in Damascus might resurface in Delhi, while a story told in Bukhara could end up whispered in Baghdad's tea houses. Historians still debate how deliberate this exchange was. Were manuscripts traded as commodities, or were they smuggled as gifts between scholars hiding knowledge from greedy markets? You catch the laughter of children weaving between stalls, their games scattering scraps of parchment. One boy wears a scroll as a pretend turban, strutting proudly until a merchant chases him down. Another girl uses a broken tablet as a tray for sweets. To them, the written word is toy before treasure, though perhaps that play keeps the stories alive in ways no merchant can. And yet, there is solemnity too. In a quiet corner of the bazaar, you see a bearded scholar unwrapping a fragile book from cloth. He lays it out for another man, who bows slightly before copying a passage with hurried strokes. No money changes hands, just respect. It feels like watching a secret handshake, one that says, knowledge is too important to belong to merchants alone. The humor never disappears, though. You can almost imagine medieval Yelp reviews. 5 stars, this scroll cured my cough. 1 star, parchment tasted like goat. The blend of commerce, reverence, and absurdity wraps around you until the whole market feels like a carnival of knowledge. With wisdom dressed up as wares, you wander through it all, the stalls pressing close, the noise rising and falling like waves. And you realize that these markets weren't just places of trade, they were crossroads of memory. Libraries scattered on tables, fragments of civilizations tossed into baskets, waiting for the next hand to carry them further. As night falls and lanterns bloom in the stalls, you step away from the noise, feeling the weight of it all. Books had traveled in caves, on camels, in the hands of merchants. Their survival a mix of devotion, accident, and sheer chance. The marketplace hums behind you, echoing like a heartbeat, reminding you that sometimes history isn't preserved in quiet monasteries or gilded halls. It's bartered on street corners, amid laughter, lies, and 1,000 smells of the Silk Road. The glow of the lantern-lit market softens as you drift toward quieter streets, where the air smells less of spice and more of damp parchment. Here, tucked behind modest doors and creaking gates, rise the hidden libraries, places that look more like storerooms than sanctuaries, yet hold the memory of civilizations. You slip inside one, ducking under a low arch, and the hush hits you like cool water. Rows of shelves sag with scrolls, codices, and clay tablets, stacked so precariously, you wonder if a sneeze could topple centuries. You run your fingers along a shelf, and dust coats your hand like powder. The manuscripts are bound in leather, cracked with age, their spines crooked, their ink fading to a rusty brown. Some are labeled carefully, others not at all. It feels less like a grand library and more like a hoarder's attic, yet you sense the weight of treasure in every pile. Imagine stumbling on a forgotten scroll of medicine, or a fragment of a lost poem, just sitting here beside moldy recipe books. Historians still debate how intentional these collections were. Were they deliberate archives, or just stockpiles that happened to survive? You hear faint whispers, two scholars bent over a candle, squinting at a scroll so faded it looks like fog on parchment. One sighs that the script is unreadable. The other insists he sees letters still dancing faintly. It's like watching two men argue over constellations, stars to one, smudges to another. Their passion feels almost comic. You'd think they were debating who left the lid off the stew, not the survival of ancient wisdom. There's humor in the smell too. The parchment reeks faintly of goats, and you can't help but imagine a medieval scholar muttering, "Ah yes, the aroma of knowledge, equal parts ink, mildew, and livestock." Books here aren't sterile museum pieces. They're living, breathing things, always threatening to crumble or combust. One careless spark from a candle could turn centuries into ash. You can almost feel your chest tighten at the thought, like holding your breath beside a tinderbox. Yet despite the fragility, there's resilience. Some manuscripts are patched with scraps from older books, recycled parchment that layers one story over another. A medical treatise hides behind a psalm, a ledger behind a poem. Reading them feels like peeling back history's wallpaper, each layer revealing a different voice. You wonder if the monks and merchants who bound these scraps knew they were creating time capsules, or if they just wanted to save money on parchment. And then, as you wander deeper, you notice oddities. A book of astronomy annotated with doodles of camels, a manuscript of law filled with sarcastic margin notes. Someone long ago had a sense of humor, mocking rules with tiny sketches. It's oddly comforting, a reminder that even scholars couldn't resist scribbling jokes in the margins, like medieval sticky notes saying lol. The silence thickens, broken only by the flutter of a page or the sigh of parchment shifting on the shelves. The room feels alive, as if the books are whispering to one another, trading secrets when no one listens. You lean closer, half expecting to hear words float up from the ink, but it's only the rustle of your breath stirring dust. As you leave, the image lingers, not a grand hall of marble columns, but a cramped room dimly lit, packed with the messy survival of memory. Knowledge here doesn't sit polished and perfect. It hangs by threads, waiting for someone to notice. And you realize the irony. The most fragile libraries are sometimes the ones that carry the longest echoes, surviving not because they were cherished, but because they were forgotten, hidden, overlooked until the world was ready to remember. The musty quiet of the hidden library fades, and you find yourself outside again, walking along the restless arteries of the Silk Road. Caravans creak and sway, and in their wagons ride not only silks and spices, but also books, bundles of scrolls wrapped in cloth, codices pressed flat under bags of grain. Knowledge, it turns out, had to hitchhike its way across continents. You watch a camel kneel as a scribe carefully balances a wooden chest onto its back, the lid painted with faint geometric patterns. To anyone else it looks like luggage, but you know it's a library on legs, The rhythm of hooves on dirt becomes almost hypnotic, like a drumbeat carrying history forward. Every sway of the caravan risks disaster. One jolt too sharp and a chest might crack open, scattering texts into dust and wind. Imagine the horror of watching Aristotle tumble into the mud, or a priceless medical scroll soaked through by rain. Historians still debate how much actually survived intact. Some think most knowledge perished in transit. Others believe the road acted like a sieve, letting only the strongest and most useful ideas endure. You notice how care varies. Some merchants treat their books like precious relics, wrapped in silk guarded with locks. Others shove them between sacks of spices, trusting cinnamon to mask the mildew. There's a certain comedy in it. Picture a medieval customs officer sniffing through bags and muttering, "Is that nutmeg? Or Plato?" At night, the caravans huddle near campfires and the books rest too, propped beside saddlebags warmed by flames as though they might absorb the heat. Scribes occasionally unroll a scroll to read aloud, their voices carrying through the smoke. Stories of distant kings, medicinal recipes, a scrap of poetry. The camels blink lazily, as if unimpressed by the fact that they're witnessing the migration of civilization's brain cells. You feel the fragility of it all. A sandstorm could bury manuscripts forever. Bandits could seize chests, caring only for the box's iron hinges. A single misstep at a river crossing, and centuries of thought would vanish beneath the current. Knowledge here is not secure. It's nomadic, as vulnerable as any traveler. Yet there's wonder too. The road itself becomes a library. Every caravan a shelf, every merchant a page-turner. The books travel farther than their authors ever dreamed, crossing mountains, deserts, and seas. They pick up new readers, new notes scribbled in margins, new pronunciations and misunderstandings that morph the meaning with each retelling. You almost laugh at the image of a philosopher's careful treatise riding in a camel pannier beside garlic bulbs and onions. It's like smuggling Shakespeare in a grocery tote, mundane, ridiculous, yet profoundly effective. Without such indignities, the ideas might never have left their birthplace. As you drift onward, you realize the Silk Road wasn't just a highway of goods. It was a bloodstream of knowledge. Books sweated, staggered, and clung to caravans, bouncing along like stubborn passengers, refusing to let go. And somehow, despite storms, thieves, and spilled spices, enough survived to stitch together a patchwork memory of human thought. It's messy, precarious, but undeniably alive. History hitchhiking on the humps of camels. The caravan dust fades from your imagination, and you slip into the quiet hush of a desert town's marketplace. Under canopies of faded cloth, not only silk and jade are traded, but knowledge itself. Here a book is as much a commodity as peppercorns, its price rising and falling with demand. You see merchants weighing manuscripts on scales, as if wisdom could be measured by the ounce, while scribes haggle fiercely over a single page of rare commentary. One scribe holds up a fragile parchment, the ink browned like tea stains, and declares it worth more than a bolt of brocade. His customer laughs, countering with a sack of walnuts. The absurdity lingers. Imagine your college textbooks priced by weight, students dragging bathroom scales to class. Historians still debate just how commercial knowledge became on the Silk Road. Was it freely shared among scholars, or strictly sold to the highest bidder? The truth likely lies in a messy mixture of both. You watch a young apprentice copy a page in the corner, his reed pen scratching as quickly as his cramped hand allows. Each stroke is an investment, each copied line a coin minted in ink. Paper itself is precious, imported and expensive, so mistakes are costly. The boy's brow furrows, his tongue pokes out in concentration, and you can't help but chuckle. It's the medieval version of pulling an all-nighter with a broken printer. Nearby, a storyteller leans against a pillar, reciting from memory what others can't afford to buy. Crowds gather, trading coins for the chance to hear fragments of epics or medical lore. It's both business and performance, knowledge slipping into the rhythms of the marketplace like any other trade. And yet, you feel the tension. Some treat these texts as sacred, demanding reverence, others as mere goods, bartering without a second thought. A merchant snaps a deal shut, handing over a scroll as if selling onions. A scribe winces, muttering a prayer to protect the words inside. The contrast is stark, devotion and commerce colliding in every transaction. As you linger, you realize that the Silk Road didn't only spread goods. It turned ideas into currency. Books became trade routes themselves, each copy a toll booth of labor, value, and negotiation. Some were treasured, locked away like jewels. Others passed hand to hand, worn thin like copper coins. And when night falls, shutters close and lamps flicker. You see merchants counting coins by candlelight, while scribes guard their drying ink with equal care. The economy of knowledge hums softly beneath the louder cries of spice and silk. You taste the faint bitterness of it, like strong tea left too long, ideas both liberated and shackled by profit. Still there's a strange reassurance. Even if a text changed hands like a sack of grain, at least it moved. At least it survived. Knowledge might have been commodified, but in being sold it was also saved. The Silk Road marketplace, loud and dusty, became an archive in its own right. Every trade another chance for words to endure. The clamor of the market fades into a dim chamber, where lamplight flickers across shelves lined with manuscripts. Here you find yourself inside the study halls of caravanserais, those temporary oases where weary travelers found not only food and rest, but often libraries. Imagine a caravan stopping for the night, camels kneeling, merchants unloading bundles of silk, and scholars slipping quietly into a room filled with ink and parchment. You sit in the hush, hearing the creak of wooden beams above, the faint scuffle of sandals across reed mats. Travelers unroll scrolls by firelight, trading not spices but syllables. One reads aloud in Arabic, another responds in Persian, and a third adds commentary in Chinese. It's like a late-night study group, only instead of arguing about math homework, they're untangling Aristotle through 3 languages and a lot of tea. A curious detail lingers in your mind. Some caravanserais supposedly employed scribes specifically to copy texts for travelers. Imagine pausing mid-journey, dropping off a manuscript like laundry, and picking up a duplicate when you depart the next morning. Historians still debate how widespread this practice really was. Were caravanserais truly hubs of textual exchange, or is that just romantic exaggeration? Either way, the image endures. A relay race of words, each stop another handoff. The atmosphere is both practical and reverent. A merchant rubs weary eyes while sketching trade routes in the margins of a text. A monk from the East carefully traces calligraphy. His brush strokes deliberate, reverent, each line a prayer disguised as ink. A child, perhaps the innkeeper's daughter, peers in curiously, lips moving as she tries to sound out letters she barely understands. And of course there's humor in it. Picture a merchant grumbling, "I came here to rest my feet, not my brain." Thus he dozes off over a copy of Galen's medical treatise. Another mutters that the candle wax costs more than the paper. You can almost hear the weary sighs of history's first all-nighter crowd. But beneath the humor lies something profound. Caravanserais became accidental universities. No walls, no diplomas, just transient classrooms powered by curiosity. Knowledge wasn't confined to ivory towers. It traveled dusty roads, carried by tired men in patched robes and restless minds that refused to sleep. As you linger in the lamplight, you realize that every night's stay was another chance for ideas to cross borders. The Silk Road was less a highway for goods and more a web of minds strung together by places like this, where ink never truly dried before being carried onward. You close your eyes, and the scent of oil lamps mingles with parchment dust. The hum of distant camels mixes with the scratching of pens. And in that blend, you feel the fragile strength of these hidden libraries, always temporary, always vulnerable, yet always ready to spark the next flame of knowledge before dawn. The lamplight from the caravanserai fades, and now you drift toward the edges of the desert, where memory lingers in the form of ruins. You find yourself wandering among crumbling mud-brick walls, arches half swallowed by sand, the faint outlines of what once might have been a library. The wind moans through broken doorways, as if it still carries whispers of the voices that read here long ago. You pause at a wall where faint traces of painted patterns remain, delicate swirls of lapis and gold dulled by centuries. Once, perhaps, shelves stood here filled with manuscripts bound in leather and tied with silk cords. Now only shadows remain. The shelves collapsed, the words carried away by looters' fire or the slow indifference of time. The silence feels thick, as though the desert itself is keeping secrets. You imagine scholars who once sat cross-legged in this very spot, leaning over manuscripts by candlelight. Perhaps one copied a treatise on astronomy, while another drafted notes on trade taxes. Somewhere in these same walls, A scribe may have sighed as ink spilled across a page, muttering curses that sound oddly familiar to anyone who's ever spilled coffee on a laptop. Some things don't change much. There's an odd fact worth noting. Some desert ruins still reveal caches of manuscripts stuffed between stones, hidden away when invasions threatened. A few survived, brittle but legible, found centuries later like bottled messages from the past. Historians still debate whether these caches were deliberate libraries in hiding or just desperate acts of preservation. So either way, they are time capsules, tiny anchors to worlds otherwise erased. The air here is filled with contrast, decay and endurance, silence and the faint echo of voices. You run your fingers across sun-baked stone, warm even at night, and you can almost imagine the ghosts of readers brushing past you, their murmurs mingling with the hiss of the wind. It feels fragile but also stubbornly alive, and humor still peeks through even in ruins. You picture a medieval librarian shaking his fist at the sandstorm, "I told you we needed stronger walls." Or a weary monk writing in the margins, "If this manuscript survives, future readers owe me a pint." Somehow, even in collapse, humanity insists on jokes. The ruins remind you that not every library leaves behind grand legacies. Some vanish quietly, their knowledge dispersed, their walls melting back into the earth. Yet each one leaves traces, subtle imprints that tell you books were here, readers were here. The hum of thought once filled these empty rooms. As you stand in the desert night, the stars above shimmer brighter than any gold leaf ever did, and you feel a quiet truth. Even when buildings fall and words scatter, the memory of knowledge endures in the imagination of those who remember to ask, what stories were kept here? You close your eyes and the wind carries a soft sigh, perhaps sand, perhaps the faintest breath of forgotten scholars, reminding you that not all ruins are truly empty. Some still hold libraries hidden in silence, waiting for someone like you to wander in and listen. The ruined arches fade into darkness as you wander further, and now the desert opens into a broad plain where travelers gather around low fires. The night is quiet except for the crackle of kindling and the soft murmur of storytellers. For here, in the absence of books, memory found another refuge, the human voice. You settle by one of the fires and listen. A weathered man leans forward, eyes gleaming as he recites a tale of Alexander the Great, embellishing it with flourishes about jeweled palaces and secret maps hidden in mountains. Across from him, a woman hums softly before retelling a legend of stars guiding caravans safely through storms. Her rhythm is gentle, hypnotic, the cadence of someone who knows stories better than sleep. Around them, children's eyelids droop, half dreaming, while adults nod slowly, filing away every word for later retelling. This was another kind of library, the oral one. Each memory a shelf, each tale a manuscript written on the mind instead of parchment. You notice how repetition becomes the glue. Phrases recur, proverbs anchor the narrative, refrains stitch the story so tightly that forgetting becomes almost impossible. It's not unlike the catchy chorus of a pop song you can't shake, except instead of bad radio, it's a lifeline for culture. Historians still debate just how accurate these oral libraries were. Did merchants carry exact versions of epics across deserts, or did they adapt stories with every retelling, reshaping them like clay? Some argue oral traditions preserved knowledge astonishingly well. Others point out the inevitable drift. Details swapped and forgotten like names in a long group chat. The truth, as always, sways somewhere between. You smile at the thought of a medieval traveler grumbling, no, the story doesn't go like that. While another insists, of course it does, my uncle swore he heard it in Kashgar. It's history and gossip entwined, accuracy tangled with entertainment. And yet through these disagreements, stories lived on. There's a warmth in this form of preservation. Oral memory is communal. Everyone present participates, whether by correcting details, adding flourishes, or simply listening and remembering. A book can be lost in a fire. A story told to 10 people lives on in 10 minds, ready to scatter like seeds on the next caravan. You sip from your imagination's mug of weak ale, the kind travelers carried, and feel the echo of that moment. Words floating in the desert night, stories fluttering upward with sparks from the fire. The desert becomes less empty, more alive, stitched together by invisible threads of memory spoken aloud. And as you lean back, the stars overhead feel like punctuation marks, each one a reminder that even in silence, stories continue. You realize that these fireside storytellers were not merely filling time, but building bridges, shaping a library without walls, without shelves, without ink, yet no less real and no less enduring. The night fire dwindles, and as you wander onward, the desert air grows colder, the horizon darker. Then faint glimmers appear ahead, like shards of starlight caught in the sand. You step closer and realize these are fragments, pieces of parchment buried half deep, ink faded but still stubbornly clinging to life. It's a graveyard of texts, a library dissolved by time yet still whispering beneath the dunes. You crouch down, brushing away sand with your hand, and feel the brittle crackle of history disintegrating at your touch. The letters dance faintly in languages both familiar and lost. Arabic prayers, Persian couplets, Chinese characters, all mingling like voices in a forgotten chorus. Some fragments are charred, as if fire once tried to silence them. Others are water-stained, a reminder that storms come even to deserts. And here you are, centuries late, an uninvited guest to their final performance. This is where history tilts toward melancholy. Libraries of the Silk Road didn't just vanish into myth. They crumbled, were eaten by insects, sold as scrap, or simply abandoned when their guardians fled. Historians still debate whether certain manuscripts from these vanished libraries were deliberately destroyed, or whether neglect alone carried them to dust. Either way, the result is the same: silence where once there was speech. And yet, isn't it strangely comforting? Even in their ruin, fragments survive, just enough to hint, to tease, to remind us that something once existed. Like the half-remembered lyrics of a song from childhood, you don't recall the verses, but the melody still lingers. These scraps are the melody of lost knowledge. You can almost laugh at the thought of some medieval merchant, dropping a page of medical advice: drink warm, goat's milk for cough, only for you to stumble on it now, centuries later, treating it like treasure. It's humbling and a little ridiculous, how time can elevate the ordinary into sacred artifact. The wind stirs, and you watch as grains of sand creep back across the fragments, reclaiming them. It feels like the desert itself is tucking them in, like a blanket drawn over sleeping children. You sense that you too are meant to let them rest, so you rise slowly, leaving the scattered parchments behind. They will not tell you their full story. They will not explain themselves. They exist as echoes, and perhaps echoes are enough. Because sometimes the most powerful part of memory is not what is preserved, but what is suggested. As you walk on, the fragments fade behind you, swallowed once more by the patient desert. Their silence follows you like a soft companion, less a loss, more a lullaby of dust and ink, reminding you that not everything needs to be fully remembered to still matter. The fragments slip behind you, and now the desert night softens into the faint glow of dawn. Pale light spreads across the horizon, and you find yourself at the edge of a small village. Mud brick walls, a market square stirring awake, the smell of bread baking in clay ovens. Here, the legacy of those lost nomad libraries lingers not in books or scrolls, but in daily life. You wander through the market and notice how the languages overlap. A merchant weighing saffron shouts prices in Persian, then jokes in Turkic, then switches to Chinese for a passing caravaner. A scribe seated by the fountain scribbles receipts in Arabic, his stylus tapping like a tiny drum. Every word is a fragment of something once carried in those rolling libraries, now woven into trade, gossip, contracts, and prayer. The libraries dissolved, but their ink seeped into ordinary speech. Historians still debate how much of our modern cultural mingling stems directly from those Silk Road exchanges. Were they the spark that lit 1,000 traditions, or just one among many threads? The arguments wind in circles, much like the streets of this village. But you can see the evidence in front of you. A recipe that combines spices from 3 continents, a proverb that echoes 2 religions, a lullaby that sounds suspiciously like a caravan song. Knowledge didn't vanish. It mutated, disguised itself as ordinary life. There's a humor to it too. Imagine a scholar from centuries ago carefully recording herbal remedies, only for those recipes to survive not in any manuscript, but in a grandmother's kitchen. Handed down with a shrug. My mother did it this way. So I do too. The footnote outlived the book. You pass by a tavern where travelers sip thin beer and swap stories. A young boy leans on the doorframe, listening wide-eyed, absorbing every word as though building a secret library in his own head. You realize the cycle is unbroken. Even in loss, something carries forward, Ideas slip from parchment to voice, from voice to habit, from habit to heritage. The rising sun catches on a brass water jug, and the glint makes you pause. The light feels almost ceremonial, as though blessing the continuation of memory in humble forms. No grand libraries stand here, no vaulted archives, just markets and kitchens and songs. But perhaps this is the truest library, the one scattered among people, too ordinary to burn, too common to erase. You step aside as a cart rattles past, laden with sacks of grain, the driver humming an old tune that might have been sung on the Silk Road centuries earlier. The dust swirls in its wake, and you feel time itself shifting again, one age folding into another, one library dissolving, another forming invisibly in its place, and as the morning brightens, you sense that the final chapter of this journey is waiting, not in the bustle of markets, but in the quiet place beyond, where stories taper into silence. The village slowly fades behind you, its sounds dissolving into the hush of open desert. The road stretches onward, a pale ribbon under the first warmth of sun, and you follow it with no destination except the rhythm of your own steps. Everything you've seen, the nomads and their scrolls, the monks copying by candlelight, the merchants trading whispers like coin, blurs together now, soft edges slipping into haze. You carry the echo of those lost libraries. But it feels lighter here, almost like dust carried on a breeze. The details no longer press against you. They drift. You let your breath match the desert's pulse, slow and steady, as though the sands themselves are lulling you. Memory becomes less about names and dates, more about sensation, the scent of old parchment, the flicker of lanterns, the creak of camel saddles swaying under stars. Historians still debate whether those nomad libraries were vast rolling caravans or smaller, scattered caches of memory. They argue about what was lost, what survived, what was imagined later. But in this fading quiet, the debates feel distant, softened. The truth is less important than the shape it leaves, the reminder that knowledge is fragile, yet stubborn, always finding new forms when old ones crumble. Your pace slows, and the desert opens into a vision of endless horizon. The sun no longer blinds, it merely warms. The dunes blur, less like sand and more like waves rocking you gently. The monks, the merchants, the alewives, the guilds, the saints, they drift like silhouettes in fog, all their voices fading into one long hum, a lullaby carried across centuries. You imagine yourself sitting, a final mug in your hands, its contents neither strong nor weak, neither feast nor famine, just enough to soothe. The foam settles, the surface stills, and you see your reflection blur with shadows of countless others who once held the same calm weight. Their stories rest inside you now, not sharp or heavy, but soft as breath. The details of history dissolve further. Libraries fold into dreams, scrolls into whispers, chants into murmurs. You feel wrapped in something woolen and gentle, like a cloak drawn around your shoulders. Even the sand underfoot loses its grit, becoming softer, cloud-like, until you are floating more than walking. The world narrows to small sounds, the distant toll of an imagined bell, the faint creak of parchment, the hush of your own inhale and exhale. Every moment stretches, lengthens, slows. You let your body sink, your mind uncoil, the story rocking you deeper. And as the last traces of the Silk Road fade, only one whisper remains, steady, soothing, final. Rest now. Let go. Drift.